At my mother's 65th birthday dinner, I sat 3 tables away from the people who were supposed to know me best, listening as she told everyone I was too selfish to help my own family. The irony was that my phone was sitting face down beside my plate, still showing the confirmation notification for the payment I had made that morning. The payment that covered my mother's mortgage, the 83rd consecutive mortgage payment I had made for her. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 41 years old when I realized my family had spent years telling a story about me that was completely backwards. That night, inside the private dining room of Bennett and Oak, the restaurant my younger brother Eric owned, I watched my mother lift her wine glass and smile at a room full of relatives, family friends, and people who had known me since I was a child. The room was decorated with gold balloons, framed photographs of my mother's life, and candles that made everything look warmer than it actually felt. My mother loved appearances. She always had. She looked around the table and started talking about how grateful she was for the people who always showed up. She thanked Eric for working so hard to keep the family together. She thanked my younger sister Molly for being such a devoted mother. Then she looked directly at me, not warmly, not lovingly, like she was preparing everyone for an announcement. Some people, she said, get successful and forget where they came from. I remember holding my fork in my hand and feeling my entire body become still. She continued, Claire has built a comfortable life for herself. She has no children, no husband, no major responsibilities. But somehow, when her family needs her, she's always too busy. Nobody spoke. I could feel people looking at me. My Aunt Ruth lowered her eyes. My cousin Mark stopped eating. My mother took another sip of wine. Then she said the sentence that changed something inside me forever. She refused to help Eric save his restaurant. $40,000 was too much for her own family. The room became silent, not shocked silence, the kind of silence where people are waiting to see if you will defend yourself. For years I would have explained. I would have apologized even when I had done nothing wrong. But that night was different. Because my phone was still glowing beside my plate, and the last notification on the screen said, Mortgage payment successful, Diane Bennett, $2,184.67. I looked at my mother. She was still smiling. She had no idea that the daughter she was calling selfish had spent years quietly keeping her house. She had no idea that the woman she accused of abandoning the family had been the reason that family was still standing. And before that night ended, everyone in that room was going to learn exactly what I had been paying for. But before I tell you how everything came out, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the person everyone calls when they need something, but the first person they blame when something goes wrong? If you have ever felt invisible inside your own family, stay with this story, because what happened next changed the way I saw love, loyalty, and boundaries forever. Because the birthday dinner was not where this story began. That was only where the truth finally became impossible to hide. To understand why my mother's words hurt so deeply, you need to understand the family I came from. I grew up in suburban Ohio with my parents, Diane and Tom Bennett, my younger brother Eric, and my younger sister Molly. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. My father was quiet, dependable, and the kind of man who fixed things before anyone knew they were broken. My mother was different. She cared deeply about what people thought. She believed family should look perfect from the outside, even if things were falling apart behind closed doors. My brother Eric was always the one everyone expected greatness from. He was charming, confident, and good at making people believe he was destined for something bigger. When he changed interests, my parents called it ambition. When he made mistakes, they called it learning. When I made mistakes, they called it irresponsibility. Molly was the sweet one, the sensitive one. She was loved deeply, but she was also protected from consequences because my mother believed Molly had already been through enough. I became something else. I became the reliable one. The daughter who remembered appointments. The daughter who filled out paperwork. The daughter who called doctors. The daughter who showed up. Nobody officially assigned me that role. It just happened. And once a family decides you are the strong one, they often forget that strong people get tired too. When I was 23, I moved away and started building my own career. I worked in financial operations, learning everything about budgets, reporting, and managing complex systems. But I learned something else too. I learned not to talk too much about my success around my family. Whenever I mentioned a promotion, my mother found a way to minimize it. "You're lucky you don't have children," she would say. "You have more freedom than the rest of us." At the time, I didn't understand what those comments meant. I thought she was just comparing our lives. I didn't realize she was slowly teaching everyone that my time was worth less because I had fewer visible responsibilities. Then my father died, 8 years before that birthday dinner. And everything changed. After his funeral, my mother sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by unopened mail and old photographs. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She told me she could not imagine selling the house where she and my father had raised us. It would feel like losing him all over again, she said. I understood grief. I understood fear, so I helped. At first, it was temporary. 6 months, that was all. I told myself I was just helping my mother get through the hardest season of her life. I had no idea that 6 months would quietly become 7 years. And I had no idea that the help I gave in silence would one day become the very thing my family used as proof that I supposedly never helped at all. For the first few months after my father passed away, I convinced myself I was only helping my mother through a difficult transition. That was the story I told myself. And honestly, I believed it. I wasn't trying to become the person responsible for everything. I wasn't trying to replace my father. I wasn't trying to prove I was the better child. I was just trying to make sure my mother didn't lose the home where she had spent 30 years of her life. The first payment I made was supposed to be the last. Then came the second. Then the third. Every time, my mother had a reason. The property taxes were higher than expected. The insurance company increased the premium. The utility bills had become impossible. There was always something, and every time I considered telling her I couldn't continue, I remembered the woman sitting alone at that kitchen table after my father's funeral. The woman who had cried into her coffee cup and told me she felt like her whole life had disappeared. So I helped. But what I didn't realize was that my family slowly stopped seeing it as help. They started seeing it as my role. The first time I noticed the change was during Thanksgiving. I had driven 3 hours after finishing a major work project because my mother said she missed having the whole family together. When I arrived, Eric was sitting in the living room, telling everyone about his plans for opening his restaurant. Everyone was listening. Everyone was excited. My mother looked at him like he was the future of the family. "You know, Eric has always had that special drive," she said. "He just needs people to believe in him." I smiled and congratulated him. That was what I always did. But then my mother turned to me and said, "Claire, maybe you could help him organize his business accounts. You're good with numbers. Not your brother needs help. Not would you be willing. Just an expectation. A responsibility quietly placed in my lap." I spent the next 2 weekends helping Eric create financial reports, organize expenses, and understand his cash flow. I never charged him. I never asked for recognition. I thought family was supposed to help each other. The problem was that the helping only seemed to move in one direction. When Eric succeeded, everyone celebrated his hard work. When I succeeded, everyone looked for ways my success could benefit them. A few years later, I received a major promotion at work. I was proud of myself. I had spent years building my career. I had stayed late, taken difficult assignments, and earned the trust of people who had no personal connection to me. I called my mother because I wanted to share the news. She listened. Then she said, "That's nice, Claire." A pause. Then, "You know, with that kind of salary, maybe you could finally help Eric expand." I remember sitting in my apartment after that phone call, staring at the wall, not because she asked, because she never asked how I felt. She never asked if I was happy. She never said she was proud. My accomplishments always became resources, never moments. And still, I continued helping, because I thought one day they would notice. I thought one day my mother would look at me and understand that I wasn't helping because I was obligated. I was helping because I loved them. But love becomes dangerous when only one person is expected to prove it. The years passed, and the emergencies became more frequent. Eric's restaurant needed help before it even opened. The freezer broke. A supplier threatened to cancel deliveries. Payroll was short 1 month. Every crisis was described as temporary. Every crisis was described as something that could be solved if everyone just contributed a little. But somehow, my contribution was always the largest one. I never handed Eric cash. I learned that lesson quickly. Instead, I paid specific bills directly. The equipment repair company, the overdue vendor invoice, the insurance payment. I told myself this was responsible, and financially, it was. But emotionally, it trapped me, because once I became the person who could fix problems, people stopped asking whether I should have to. My sister Molly was different. She loved me. I knew she did. But she was also caught inside the same family system. She was raising twins, struggling with childcare costs, and constantly trying to keep peace. When my mother needed help, Molly would say things like, "Claire, you know Mom depends on you." She never said, "That's unfair." She never said, "You've done enough." Because in our family, nobody wanted to be the person who admitted the truth. The truth was that my mother's comfortable life was being funded by the daughter she publicly described as distant. The truth was that Eric's confidence was supported by the sister everyone accused of being unavailable. The truth was that I had become invisible because I made everything look easy. Then came the moment that finally made me start keeping records. I had planned a vacation, nothing extravagant, just 5 days near the coast. I had booked the hotel months earlier. I needed the break. I needed time where nobody called me with a problem. 3 days before I left, my mother called. Her voice sounded worried. The county had sent a notice about unpaid property taxes. She said she was embarrassed. She said she didn't know who else to call. I canceled my trip. I paid the bill. I told myself I could take another vacation later. But 2 weeks afterward, I opened social media and saw pictures from my mother's account. There she was, at a lake house, with Eric, his wife, and their children. The caption said, "Making memories with the people who always make time for us." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Because I knew exactly what it meant. I had given up my time to protect the house, and Eric got the thank you post. That night, for the first time, I opened a folder on my computer and created a document. I named it Family Bridge. At first, I didn't know why I was doing it. Maybe part of me was afraid I would forget. Maybe part of me needed proof that I wasn't imagining things. I started saving receipts, payment confirmations, emails, messages, anything connected to the money I had quietly spent. I wasn't preparing for war. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just trying to understand my own life. Because something had started bothering me. The same family that depended on me was slowly building a story where I was the person who cared the least. And what they didn't know was that while they were talking about what I had not done, I was quietly documenting everything I had. The truth was, my family knew only the version of my life they had created. They knew Claire, the daughter who was too busy, the daughter who had it easier, the daughter who never showed up enough. They did not know Claire Bennett, the woman who had built something completely separate from them. They did not know what I had created when nobody was watching. They did not know that the quiet daughter they underestimated had spent 15 years building a life they never bothered to ask about, and that hidden life was the one thing that would eventually change everything. Because the moment my family finally needed proof, I already had it, and they had no idea. For years, I thought being strong meant handling everything alone. I thought strength meant not complaining, not asking for recognition, not making other people uncomfortable with the truth. But eventually, I learned something important. Strength without boundaries just teaches people how much they can take from you. The person who helped me understand that was my Aunt Ruth. Ruth Bennett was my father's older sister. She was 68 years old, retired, and probably one of the smartest people I knew. Before retiring, she had worked as a certified public accountant, which meant she noticed details other people ignored. Numbers, patterns, missing information. She had always been different from the rest of my family. While everyone else focused on appearances, Ruth focused on reality. After my father died, she was one of the few people who noticed that something about my mother's financial situation did not add up. She never judged my mother. She never criticized her. But she noticed. One morning, about a year after my father's funeral, Ruth invited me to breakfast at a small cafe near her apartment. I remember sitting across from her while she stirred honey into her tea. She looked at me and asked one simple question. "How much are you carrying that nobody knows about?" I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know how to answer. That was the first time someone had asked me that. Not, "How much can you help?" Not, "What does mom need?" Not, "Can you fix this?" Just, "How much are you carrying?" And suddenly, I couldn't pretend anymore. I told her everything: the mortgage payments, the bills, Eric's business expenses, the constant emergencies, the way my mother told everyone she was managing fine while quietly depending on me. Ruth didn't interrupt, she just listened. When I finished, she placed her coffee cup down and said something I never forgot. "Claire, helping someone is an act of love, but allowing someone to rewrite your sacrifice as their right is something else." Those words stayed with me, because deep down, I knew she was right. I had confused being needed with being valued, and those were not the same thing. After that conversation, Ruth helped me organize everything. Not because she wanted me to attack my family, she actually warned me against that. "Don't collect proof because you want revenge," she told me. "Collect proof because you deserve to know the truth of your own story." So we created a system. Every payment, every receipt, every message, every financial conversation, everything went into the Family Bridge folder. At first, I felt strange doing it, almost guilty. Like keeping records meant I was questioning my family's intentions, but Ruth reminded me that documentation was not distrust. It was clarity, and over time, that folder became something more than a financial record. It became a record of everything I had given, while everyone pretended I had given nothing. After the birthday dinner, I didn't drive home. I couldn't. I sat in my car outside the restaurant for almost 20 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel. The candles from the dining room were still glowing through the windows. Inside, my family was probably finishing dessert, probably discussing what had happened, probably deciding whether I was the villain. My phone kept buzzing. Messages from the family group chat. Diane had already started controlling the story. "Mom, Claire, I hope you understand how hurtful your behavior was tonight." Then another message. "Mom, Eric is under pressure and needed his sister." Then, "Sometimes love requires sacrifice." I stared at those words, because they sounded reasonable. That was the hardest part. Manipulation does not always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds like responsibility. Sometimes it sounds like family. Before I could respond, Ruth called me. She had noticed I left. "Where are you?" she asked. I told her I was sitting outside the restaurant. There was a pause. Then she said, "Come over." So I drove to her condominium. Ruth opened the door wearing an old sweater and slippers. She didn't ask if I was okay. She already knew I wasn't. She made tea, sat across from me, and let me finally say everything I had swallowed for years. "I don't understand how they can believe that," I said. "How can my own mother tell people I don't help, when I have spent years helping?" Ruth looked down for a moment. Then she reached for her phone. "There's something you need to see." She turned the screen toward me. It was a message from my mother, sent earlier that same afternoon. The message was to Ruth, and it said, "Once everyone pressures Claire, she'll give Eric the money. She always comes around." I read it twice, then a third time, because suddenly, everything became clear. The birthday dinner was not an emotional outburst. It was planned. My mother wasn't telling people I was selfish because she believed it. She was telling them because she thought shame would make me obey. I felt something inside me change, not anger, not even sadness, something quieter, something final. For years, I had been trying to prove that I was a good daughter. That night, I realized I had already proved it. The only person who still needed convincing was me. Ruth held my hand and said, "You don't have to destroy them, Claire. You just have to stop allowing them to destroy you." I knew then that the next step would not be easy, because my family was about to hold another meeting. And this time, they weren't inviting me because they wanted to understand. They were inviting me because they believed they could pressure me one more time. 2 days later, Eric's restaurant crisis became the excuse. His landlord had issued a notice. The restaurant was behind on payments. Eric needed $40,000 to keep the business alive, and according to my mother, there was only one person who could save him: me. Diane organized what she called a family budget meeting, but I knew better. This wasn't a meeting, it was an intervention. She reserved the same private room at Bennett and Oak where she had embarrassed me. She invited Eric, Molly's husband Ben, two cousins who always supported my mother's version of events, Pastor Graham, a family friend who Diane believed would make me feel guilty, and Ruth. The guest list told me everything. My mother wasn't looking for a conversation. She was building an audience. Before the meeting, I spoke with an attorney about ending my financial support properly. I spoke with my therapist about staying calm, and I spoke with Ruth about what I should bring. Not everything. Just enough. The truth did not need every detail. It only needed the details nobody could deny. I printed the 7-year payment summary. I printed selected bank confirmations. I brought Diane's signed acknowledgement from the mortgage review, and I brought the message proving the pressure campaign had been planned. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid of the documents. The documents were easy. Numbers do not panic. Numbers do not manipulate. People do. My fear was simpler. What if the truth changed nothing? What if my family saw everything and still chose the same story? That was the question I carried into Bennett and Oak. And when I walked through those doors, my mother was already sitting at the head of the table. She looked at me and smiled. The same smile she had worn at her birthday dinner. The smile of someone who believed she already knew how the conversation would end. She had no idea that for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into that room to earn my place. I was walking in to tell the truth. The room felt different when I walked in. Maybe because I was different. 2 days earlier, I would have walked into that private dining room, carrying the same invisible weight I had carried for years. The weight of keeping everyone comfortable. The weight of making sure nobody was angry. The weight of proving that I was still a good daughter. But that morning, I walked in carrying a folder, and for the first time, I understood that the truth could be heavier than guilt. Bennett and Oak was quiet, because the restaurant had not opened yet. The chairs were arranged around the long wooden table near the window. The same room where my mother had celebrated her birthday. The same room where she had told everyone I was selfish, except this time, she wasn't surrounded by people who only knew her version of the story. This time, I had brought mine. Diane sat at the head of the table. Eric sat beside her. He looked tired, but not worried. That bothered me. Because I realized he still believed this meeting was just another family conversation, where everyone would eventually convince me to do what they wanted. Molly sat across from me, looking uncomfortable. She avoided eye contact. Ben, her husband, quietly looked through the menu, even though nobody was ordering food. Pastor Graham sat with his hands folded, and Ruth sat beside me, not speaking, just present. My mother smiled. "Claire," she said, "I'm glad you came. I hope you're ready to fix this." Fix this? Those words, I had heard them my entire life. Whenever someone else created the problem, I was expected to repair it. I placed my folder on the table. "I came here to talk," I said. Diane nodded. "Good. Because this isn't about blaming anyone. It's about family." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I finally understood the pattern. Whenever my mother wanted something, she called it family. Whenever I needed understanding, it became complicated. Eric leaned forward. "I don't want this to become a fight," he said. "I just need help." His voice was calm, reasonable. That was Eric's talent. He could make almost anything sound harmless. "I'm not asking you to save my entire business. I'm asking you to help me get through a difficult period." I looked at him. $40,000 is not a small favor, Eric. He sighed. "I knew you would say that." There it was, the expectation, the disappointment before I had even answered. My mother reached across the table. "Claire, nobody is saying you're responsible for everything." I looked at her, then at Eric, then back at her, because that was exactly what they were saying. They were just saying it more politely. Diane continued. "You have built a nice life for yourself. You're comfortable. You have options." There was that word again. Comfortable. As if my hard work had somehow made my sacrifices less meaningful. as if having stability meant I owed everyone access to it. Eric opened a folder with his restaurant numbers. I'm not asking because I'm careless, I'm asking because I'm family. I glanced at the papers. Revenue projections, future plans, potential growth. But I noticed something missing. No explanation for the overdue bills, no mention of the failed expansion, no mention of the money he had withdrawn from the business. Only the part of the story that made him look like someone worth saving. Then my mother spoke. I just don't understand how a daughter can watch her brother struggle and do nothing. That sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because it was new, because it was familiar. It was the same story she had told at the birthday dinner, the same story she had repeated to relatives. The same story everyone believed. Claire does not help. Claire does not care. Claire thinks she is better than us. I looked around the table, and for a moment, I almost stayed quiet. Old habits are powerful. Even when people hurt you, part of you still wants their approval. Part of you still hopes they will finally say, I see what you have done. But then I remembered the message Ruth showed me. Once everyone pressures Claire, she'll give Eric the money. She always comes around. My mother was not waiting for me to explain. She was waiting for me to surrender. So I asked the question I had been holding inside for years. Mom, before we discuss what I haven't done, can we talk about what I have? The room became quiet. Diane frowned. What does that mean? I opened the folder. It means I think everyone here deserves the full story. My mother immediately shook her head. Claire, this is not the time to bring up old things. Old things. That was how she described years of support, years of payments, years of sacrifice. Old things. I connected my laptop to the television mounted on the wall. The screen lit up. Everyone looked toward it. I opened the first document. The title appeared, Family Support Paid, by Claire Bennett, 7-year verified summary. Nobody spoke, not even Eric. I looked at their faces, and I realized something. For years, I had been afraid of what would happen if they knew the truth. But maybe the truth was never the thing I needed to fear. Maybe it was their reaction to losing the version of me they controlled. The first page showed the basics: mortgage payments, property taxes, utilities, insurance, medical expenses, direct payments to vendors. I watched people slowly lean closer. Molly looked confused. Ben stopped pretending not to listen. Pastor Graham adjusted his glasses. My mother's expression changed. Only slightly, but I saw it. Recognition. She knew exactly what she was looking at. Claire, she said quietly, you don't need to do this. I looked at her. Why not? Because money is not the point. I nodded. You're right. Then I clicked to the next page. Money is not the point. I looked around the table. The point is that everyone here believes I refused to help this family. Nobody interrupted. The point is that I was called selfish in front of everyone because I wouldn't give Eric $40,000. My voice stayed calm, but nobody knows that I have already spent years helping. Eric crossed his arms. That doesn't mean you get to throw it in our faces. I looked at him. I'm not throwing anything in your face. I paused. I'm showing you what you forgot. Ruth placed her hand on the table. Not to stop me. To remind me I wasn't alone. Then I asked everyone a question. What do you believe my mother pays every month? Nobody answered. So I asked again. What do you believe keeps this house running? Molly finally spoke. Mom has savings. I nodded. Okay, Ben said quietly. I thought Eric helped sometimes. I looked at Eric. He looked away. Pastor Graham said nothing, and that silence told me everything. They had all built a story without ever asking for the truth. My mother stood up. This is inappropriate. I looked at her. No, Mom. I clicked to the next document. This is overdue. The screen changed. A bank statement. A payment confirmation. Another receipt. Another year. Another month. Another reminder of everything I had done, while everyone believed I had done nothing. And then I opened the message. The one from Diane. The one proving the birthday dinner was not accidental. The one proving the pressure had been planned. The room was about to learn not only what I had paid, they were about to learn that my mother knew exactly how much she had taken, and she still called me selfish. The room changed when the message appeared on the screen. Before that moment, my family could still pretend this was a misunderstanding. They could tell themselves I was being dramatic. They could tell themselves I had helped a little, but not enough to matter. They could tell themselves my mother's version was still mostly true, but that message removed the last piece of comfort they had, because it showed intention. It showed that my mother did not accidentally forget what I had done. She knew. She knew I had been paying the bills. She knew I had been helping, and she still decided to tell everyone I was selfish because she believed pressure would make me give her more. The message from my mother to Ruth sat there on the screen. Once everyone pressures Claire, she'll give Eric the money. She always comes around. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the restaurant's refrigerator from the kitchen. My mother stared at the television. Then she looked at Ruth. "You had no right to show that." Ruth didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She simply said, "I had every right to stop watching Claire carry a burden that everyone else pretended did not exist." My mother looked away. That was the first time I saw something I had rarely seen from her. Not sadness, not anger. Fear, because the story she had controlled for years was no longer hers. Eric leaned forward. "Okay, but this doesn't change anything." Everyone looked at him. He shrugged. "I mean, fine. Claire helped Mom. Nobody is denying that. But we're talking about now." I almost smiled. Because that was exactly what I expected. Even when the truth arrived, Eric immediately moved the conversation back to what he wanted. The money, the rescue, the next emergency. I closed the document. "No, Eric, we are talking about everything." He frowned. "I need help now." I nodded. And I needed acknowledgement for years. That sentence stayed in the air, because nobody had an answer. My mother finally spoke. "Claire, are you saying you want us to thank you?" I looked at her, and honestly that question hurt more than the accusation, because it revealed something. She still thought this was about recognition. It wasn't. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a ceremony. I didn't need everyone to tell me I was a hero. I needed them to stop pretending I had done nothing. "I don't want to thank you," I said. "I want the truth." I clicked to the next page. The total appeared. 7 years of payments. Mortgage, insurance, taxes, utilities, medical costs, business assistance, everything. The number was larger than most people expected. $168,742. Molly covered her mouth. "Oh my God." Ben leaned closer. "That can't be right." I looked at him. "It is." He looked toward Eric. "Did you know about this?" Eric hesitated. That hesitation answered the question before he did. "I knew Mom had some help." Some help. That phrase almost made me laugh. 7 years, more than $160,000, and somehow it was still some help. My mother shook her head. "You're making this sound like we forced you." I looked at her carefully, because that was the question I had been waiting for. Did I choose to help? Yes. Did they force me physically? No. But there was another kind of pressure, the kind families create without saying it directly. The pressure of being called selfish, the pressure of disappointing everyone, the pressure of being the daughter who was supposed to handle things. "I chose to help," I said, and that is exactly why I stayed quiet. Everyone listened. Because I wanted it to be love. I looked at my mother. But love stops feeling like love when people only remember what they need from you. My mother's eyes filled with tears. For a second, the old instinct returned. The instinct to comfort her. The instinct to say it was okay. The instinct to make everything easier. But I stopped myself. Because every time I had protected someone else's feelings, mine had disappeared. Eric changed direction. "If you have all this money, why not just help me now?" There it was, the sentence that proved everything. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I didn't realize." Not, "How did you carry this alone?" Just, "Why won't you give me more?" I looked at him. "Because your emergency does not erase my exhaustion." He looked offended. "You're really going to let the business fail?" I answered calmly. "I'm not making your business fail, Eric." I pointed toward his paperwork. "Your decisions did." Nobody moved. Because for the first time, nobody was looking at me as the problem. They were looking at the actual problem. Eric's spending, Eric's choices, Eric's expectation that someone else would always save him. My mother tried one final argument. Family helps family. I nodded. Yes. Then I looked around the table. But family also tells the truth. That was the difference. I had spent years believing love meant never keeping score. But I realized something. There is a difference between not keeping score and pretending the score does not exist. I had given because I loved them. They had accepted because they expected it. Those were not the same thing. I reached into my folder and removed one final document, the transition letter. My mother looked at it. What is that? I placed it in front of her. It explains what happens next. Her expression changed. What does that mean? It means the automatic payments end. Silence. Not angry silence. A shocked silence. Because they finally understood. The person they thought would always return had made a decision. I'm giving you 60 days, I said. During that time, I'll help you meet with a financial counselor. I'll help make sure everything transitions properly. My mother stared at me. And after that? I took a breath. After that, you will be responsible for your own life. The words felt heavy, but they also felt honest. Diane whispered, "You're abandoning me." I shook my head. "No, Mom." I looked directly at her. "I'm stopping myself from disappearing." Nobody had a response, because the truth did not need a louder voice, it just needed a place to stand. I packed my folder. Ruth stood beside me, and as I walked toward the door of Bennett and Oak, I knew something had changed. Not because my family finally understood me, but because I finally understood myself. I was no longer waiting for them to choose me, I was choosing myself. The consequences did not happen all at once. There was no dramatic collapse, no movie-style ending where everyone apologized immediately and admitted they were wrong. Real life is slower than that. And sometimes, the hardest part of setting a boundary is watching people struggle after you stop protecting them. The first few weeks were uncomfortable. My mother told relatives that I had cut her off. But something was different this time. People had seen the documents. They had heard the truth directly from me. They could no longer pretend they didn't know. Pastor Graham, who had once sat quietly while my mother pressured me, eventually called and apologized. "I should have asked more questions," he said. I appreciated the apology, but I also understood something. An apology does not erase the moment someone chose not to see you. Molly changed too. She called me one evening and cried. Not because she wanted money, not because she needed something, because she finally understood. "Claire," she said, "I didn't know." I believed her. Because Molly had always been protected from the full picture. She had been benefiting from the system, but she had not created it. "I should have noticed," she said. I told her the truth. Maybe. A pause. "But what matters is what you do now." And for the first time, my sister listened. Eric had a harder time accepting reality. Without my guarantee, his landlord refused to extend the lease under the same terms. He had to make difficult decisions. He sold some equipment. He reduced expenses. Eventually, he closed the restaurant and accepted a management position at a hotel restaurant. It was not the ending he wanted, but it was not the end of his life either. And that mattered, because consequences are not the same as punishment. Sometimes consequences are simply what happens when someone can no longer rely on another person's sacrifice. My mother resisted the transition the longest. She refused the financial counselor at first. She believed I would eventually change my mind, because for 7 years I had. But this time was different. This time I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was simply done. And when the automatic payments finally stopped, my mother had to face the reality she had avoided for years. She had a house she could no longer comfortably afford, a lifestyle built on someone else's quiet sacrifice, and a daughter who was no longer willing to disappear to maintain it. For the first time in years, my phone stopped feeling like a warning device. Before, every call from my mother created a reaction in my body before I even answered. My heart would speed up. My mind would start preparing solutions. I would wonder what emergency I was about to inherit. A bill, a problem, a family disagreement. Something that needed fixing, but after the payments stopped, something strange happened. The silence felt uncomfortable at first. Then it started feeling peaceful. I had spent so many years believing that being needed was the same as being loved that I didn't know what to do when nobody needed rescuing. I had to learn how to exist without constantly preparing for the next crisis, and that was harder than I expected. Because even when you leave an unhealthy role, your mind sometimes keeps trying to return to it. There were nights when I would look at my phone and wonder if I should call my mother. There were moments when guilt would creep in. What if she was struggling? What if I had been too harsh? What if I really was the selfish person everyone said I was? But then I would remember that birthday dinner. I would remember my mother raising her glass and telling everyone I didn't help. I would remember the way my brother looked at me when he asked for another $40,000 after learning what I had already done. And I would remind myself, I was not abandoning my family. I was finally refusing to abandon myself. A few months later, Eric contacted me. At first, I thought he wanted to apologize. The message started with, "Claire, I've been thinking about everything." I kept reading. Then came the part I expected. "I know things got messy, but maybe we can move past it. Actually, I was wondering if Northline Ledger needed anyone in operations. I've learned a lot from running a business." I stared at the screen. It was almost impressive how quickly the conversation moved from apology to opportunity. I didn't respond immediately. I waited, because the old Claire would have answered from guilt. The new Claire answered from clarity. I wrote, "Eric, I hope you find the right opportunity, but I'm not able to mix our family history with my business. I wish you success, but I need to keep that boundary." He replied with only one sentence. "Wow, I guess you really have changed." And for once, I took that as a compliment. Because I had changed, not into someone cold, not into someone who stopped caring. I had changed into someone who finally cared about herself too. My mother took longer. For months, she moved between anger and sadness. Some days she sent messages saying she missed me. Other days, she reminded me of everything she had sacrificed for me as a child. She sent me old photographs, pictures from birthdays, school events, family vacations, moments that were real. And that was the hardest part, because toxic family situations are rarely made only of bad memories. There were good moments too. There was a time when my mother packed my lunch before school. There was a time when she sat beside me when I was sick. There was a time when she was the person I ran to when I was scared. That was why it hurt, because I wasn't grieving the loss of a perfect mother. I was grieving the relationship I wished we could have had. Eventually, she sent me a letter. Not a text, not a voicemail. A handwritten letter. I almost didn't open it, but I did. For the first time, my mother admitted specific things. She admitted that she had allowed Eric to become the center of the family. She admitted that she had used guilt because she was afraid. She admitted that she had relied on me because she believed I would never leave. That sentence stayed with me, because it was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from her. She had not believed I was selfish. She had believed I would always sacrifice. And she had confused my patience with permission. A few weeks later, I agreed to meet her for coffee, not at her house, not somewhere private. A small cafe halfway between our homes, a neutral place, a place where old patterns had less power. When she arrived, she looked older, smaller, not because she had changed physically, because for the first time, she was sitting across from me without the safety net I had provided. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Do you hate me?" she asked. The question surprised me, because hate would have been easier. Hate is simple, but what I felt was more complicated. "No," I said. "I don't hate you." She looked down. "Then why does it feel like I lost my daughter?" I took a breath, because I wanted to answer carefully, not from anger, not from old pain, from truth. "Mom, I never stopped being your daughter." I paused. "But you stopped treating me like one." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Can we fix this?" I thought about that question. The old version of me would have immediately said yes. She would have promised everything would be okay. She would have taken responsibility for repairing the relationship. But I was not that woman anymore. "I think we can build something different," I said. "But it can't be the way it was." She nodded slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means I can have a relationship with you," I explained. But I cannot be your emergency plan. She looked away. I understand. I hoped she did. But I also knew understanding takes time. Trust is not rebuilt because someone says sorry once. It is rebuilt through repeated actions. A year after my mother's birthday dinner, my life looked completely different. Not because I became richer, not because my family finally admitted I was right, but because I no longer measured my worth by how much I could provide. Northline Ledger continued growing. I hired 2 more employees. I started contributing more to my retirement. I finally took vacations without feeling guilty. And for the first time in years, I bought something just because I wanted it. A small cottage near a lake. Nothing huge, nothing flashy, just a quiet place with a porch where I could drink coffee in the morning and hear birds instead of emergency phone calls. The first Sunday dinner I hosted there was one of the most meaningful days of my life. Ruth came. Molly came with her family. A few close friends from work came, people who knew me not because of what I could do for them, but because they enjoyed who I was. That was a feeling I had forgotten. Being loved without being useful. Molly and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. Not perfectly, but honestly, Eric and I remained distant. I hoped he found stability. I hoped he learned. But I no longer carried responsibility for his choices. And my mother? She and I found something new. Not the relationship we had before. Something more realistic. We met once a month for coffee. We talked about normal things. Movies, weather, family memories. But money was no longer part of our relationship. That boundary protected both of us. Because love without boundaries had nearly destroyed us. Sometimes people ask me if I regret helping my family for so many years. The answer is complicated. I don't regret helping. That came from love. What I regret is believing that sacrifice would eventually make people see me. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes people only notice your value when you stop giving them unlimited access to it. My mother called me selfish because I refused to save everyone one more time. But the truth was much simpler. I had spent years proving I was a good daughter. The one thing I had never proved was that I was allowed to be a whole person, and now I know I am. I can love people without losing myself. I can help without being used. I can forgive without forgetting. And I can walk away from what hurts me without becoming a bad person. If you have ever been the person everyone depends on but nobody appreciates, I hope my story reminds you of something. Your kindness is valuable. Your love matters. But your life belongs to you too. Sometimes the hardest boundary you set is the one that finally gives you room to breathe. If this story connected with you, share your experience in the comments. You never know who might need to hear that they are not alone. And if you want more stories about family, healing, and finding your voice after years of being unheard, consider subscribing, because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not fight harder, it is finally choose themselves.